All right, everybody. Turn that off. There we go. Hope you're doing all right this morning. Um, Wanted to go ahead and send out the video for this week. And forgive me, I'm just pulling up our notes for this week. We're on Unit 4, Session 1. Unit 4, Session 1. Hope everybody had a good Thanksgiving and everything. And we're back at it for a few weeks before Christmas. So, Unit 4, Session 1, we're starting a new book of the Bible this week. We're starting in the book of Exodus, and we'll spend 4 weeks in Exodus, I believe. We may spend more, I don't know. But this core story of Exodus, I believe, is 4 weeks of what we'll spend in this unit. And this it's going to pick up in chapter 3. And so the curriculum kind of presupposes that you know the story up to this point. Remember that the story's ended with Joseph in Genesis, and then when Exodus starts, God's favor and even the Israelites had the favor of the Egyptians for many years, but 300 or 400 years had passed, and a new pharaoh arose that was threatened by the Israelites because they almost outgrown the Egyptians. And so, what does he do? He enslaves them, and puts forward these awful decrees of even killing the male sons, and all this awful things are beginning to happen to the Israelites. And when we pick up in chapter 3, we're actually towards the end of Moses' life. Okay, so Moses spent the first 40 years of his life in Egypt as really a prince. He was Pharaoh's wife found him and raised him, and so he was kind of raised in royalty. And then the next 40 years of his life he spends in exile in the desert because he killed an Egyptian, and so he's a murderer. And he's a shepherd, lives out his days there, 80 years old, about to relax and kind of end his life. And then the biggest part of his life takes place when he's around 80 years old. And so this is where we pick up Exodus chapter 3, in the story of the burning bush. And so we see here in the first 7 verses that God reveals his holiness. So God reveals his holiness. Moses is standing there taking care of his sheep, and he sees one that gets away. So he goes to retrieve it. And on the way, he sees a bush that is burning, but it's not being consumed, right? And so obviously puzzles him. And then the voice of God begins to speak, right? In fact, this place is so holy that God tells Moses to take off his sandals because the place that he's standing is holy ground. Gives me chills just thinking about that, about the incredible scene that was right there before Moses. Then we look, that was verses 3, or chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. Then we look at verses 7 through 15, and we see that God reveals his identity. He reveals his identity. And he starts this section by beginning to talk about his people being in captivity and that he has heard their cry. And in verse 14, we get the famous verse that says, God says to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, say this to the people of Israel, Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Excuse me, I skipped a verse. Tell the people of Israel that I am has sent you. So sorry, I totally butchered that. I read the line after. So essentially, God introduces himself as I am, which is actually in the Hebrew is Yahweh, the personal and the true name of God that we see right here. And so Moses knows who he's talking to, like the God of the entire universe. And so we see that God reveals his identity. And then finally, in verses 19 through 22, God reveals his power. And he begins to show these great and mighty things that he's going to do. And he basically through that assures Moses that hey, you don't have to fear because of who I am, because of who I am as the God of the universe, right? Like I'm the one that's sending you. And you go on in chapter 4 and we see that Moses has all these complaints and God sends him these various signs. But what I think is important for us to note about this passage is that the adequacy that Moses has when he goes into the land of Egypt against the most powerful nation in the world, the adequacy that he feels does not come from himself. It comes from God. And the fact that God took the time to reveal himself, show who he was, And that didn't mean Moses was absent of fear, but he realized that Moses, hey, I'm not going on my own authority. God is the one that's sending me. You know, if you watch modern movies or superhero movies, every superhero movie has this call um, where they feel like they can't do it or they can't make an impact, but the need is great and they have the ability. And so because of that, they go, right? And a lot of that narrative is actually from like biblical narrative, right? When we see that, God is the one that enables um, the hero in this story to go. We look at this story and we say, "Oh, Moses is a hero," and it's like, not so much, right? He's just kind of the one that's executing what God has done, right? And so, I hope this is helpful for you this week. The story of Moses is an incredible story, and it really, I think, ultimately the whole story, even all the way through like the entire first 5 books of the Bible, we see a beautiful depiction of Christ through that story. But hope that's helpful for you as you prepare this week. Have a great week, and we'll see you on Sunday.